Welcome back to Not So Grand Garage. Today I'm out in the shop and we are going to tear into the little Samurai here. I finally got all the suspension components in, so we're going to start cutting out all the lift kit that was done by the previous owner and do it right. There's a lot of custom fabricated brackets and what have you that have been welded onto the axle housings and things like that. All that's going to go away. We're going to install a fresh set of OME lift springs, energy suspension bushings. We got new U-bolt kits from Trail Gear, new drop pitman arm to correct some steering issues, so on and so forth. So we've got a fairly busy day, so let's get at it. So I'll bring you under here to show you what I'm working with. As you can see, we've got some custom plates here welded onto the factory spring perches. We've got another set of spring perches that were at some point welded to the top of the axle housing. We've got some custom steering stuff going on here. They bent the drag link to clear, welded on some bracing, and we've got the factory springs and a spring over setup. And as you can tell, they are they're not really springs anymore. They don't do spring things. They're just bent up pieces of steel now, and they're folding back on themselves. So the goal today is to get the front end sorted out. I probably won't get it completely done because I've got some other things to do to it as well. I don't have steering components in yet, but yeah, I'm gonna get the front end jacked up and get these factory leaf springs out of the way, get as much unbolted as I can, and then start cutting apart all these brackets that have been welded on. Hopefully I can salvage the factory spring hangers or the factory spring perches on the axle housings, because I don't have replacements. So hopefully I can get those plates cut off and save those, but we'll see. Let's get started. So we've got it up in the air on jack stands, got the axle supported on jack stands as well. I did go on and get the sway bar disconnected on both ends. Got to pull the shock bolts out and drop those out of the way. And then we're going to go on and start pulling the shackle side bolts and the rear bolts. And then we will probably end up cutting the U-bolts because I strongly doubt they're going to come out. They're in pretty rough shape. They're bent. And I just don't think they're going to come loose. I'll try it, but we'll see. Probably end up cutting them. And then we'll be ready to start removing this lift kit, and hopefully can get this front end knocked out pretty quick and go from there. I'm not gonna bore you all too much with the piddly unbolt and bolt stuff until I start cutting things out, and then when it starts going back together, we'll get a little bit more detailed with it. Now I've got everything cut out of the way, got the U-bolts out, and you can kind of see now the situation going on with these stock springs, which is a pretty common issue when you use the stock springs on these Samurais in a spring over setup. But yeah, the axle's pretty well ready to drop out. And as you can see here, this is what I'm dealing with. I've got to cut all this out of the way, hopefully save the factory spring perch. And then, if you notice, I'm not sure if you can see that very well, there's only one little spot weld on the top holding that spring perch in place. And same story on the passenger side, except that weld is broke. So literally the only thing that has been holding this front axle from twisting is hopes and dreams, I guess. and steering components and everything else. So thankfully this thing wasn't a daily driver, but with a little bit of time we're going to get it back to where it should be so it can be a reliable driver and still be fun. But anyways, I'm going to go on and get these bolts out on both ends of the springs, get the springs pulled out, and start cutting up on these spring perches, see what we can save and see what we're going to have to rebuild. And here is a comparison. The springs I just took out of the front, as you can see, they are bent. The U-bolt, or the spring bolt holes, bushings are shot, and a comparison to our new ones, which this is going back to a spring under setup. What we're going to do is, these springs I picked up from OME, they will give approximately 2 inches of lift. Some claim up to 3. So we're going to put them in all the way around. The owner's wanting to run 31s on this, and it's geared for it, so we're good there. We're going to put these springs in with the stock shackles, put the 31s on it, and see just how much more we need, and then either build shackles or pick some up. Really, we could get away with the 1.5-inch lift shackles, and this setup would be more than enough for the 31-inch tires he's wanting. But I think we may just build some shackles so we can dial the ride height in exactly where he wants it, and it'll be cheaper. It doesn't take much to build shackles, a little bit of 3/8 plate. So yeah, we'll do that, see how much more lift we need, if we even need any more, make sure everything clears, and dial the height in right. But with that said, we're going to go on and get these new springs set up and ready to go. I've got energy suspension bushings, which these are for aftermarket shackles, which the only difference is the ones for aftermarket shackles, I believe, run a 1/2-inch sleeve instead of the metric sleeve. So you run 1/2-inch bolts, which those springs already had 1/2-inch bolts through them, which means all the frame hardware, or all the frame bracketry, has already been drilled out for 1/2-inch. So this is the route we're going to go. So we'll get the new bushings put in, our front springs, and get the front springs set in place. Now before I can get the front springs put in place, I'm gonna have to come under here and cut this bar stock off of the factory perches. My plan is just bring the grinder in, cut these welds around the sides, hopefully work this plate off and clean this up. Hopefully we can save on these, because I don't have replacements, and really they're in good shape other than the nonsense welded to them. So I think I can get them cleaned up, get them usable, and that'll make things easier. But yeah, so we're gonna go on and try and do that and see how we come there. Once that's done, I'll bring you back and we'll get the front springs put back in. So I've got all this mess cut off finally. As you can tell, this is the top spring perch that someone had welded on for the spring over. Yeah, one little tack, no penetration on the welds, barely holding on, didn't take much to take it off. The bottom plate, however, that was welded to the factory spring perch was done fairly well. But I was able to salvage everything. This is the factory shock mount that they had cut off the plate and welded to this, so I'm going to cut this back off, re-weld it to the factory plate, clean these plates up, so we'll be able to run all factory setup as far as the shock mounts and sway bar mounts and all that stuff goes. So I was able to get everything cleaned up fairly well on this side. It's not perfect, you know, there's some spots where the welds aren't perfectly smooth and everything, but I don't want to get too carried away grinding on this housing. It's not critical, so there's no point in doing that. But yeah, now I'm going to go on and get our new bushings put in both ends of this spring and loosely bolt the spring in place on this side. Now that'll kind of help me out because this axle housing's been moving around a good bit. But yeah, I'm gonna loosely bolt it in on this side and go on and get this side over here cleaned up and keep going. Not too bad so far. A little time consuming, but it beats the alternative, which is replacing axle housings and all that fun stuff. So, or using all this cobbled together mess, trying to fix it, finding some decent springs that'll hold up in a spring over. But we wanted this thing to ride fairly decent. Short of going with like YJ springs and doing the spring over on that, there's no good way to get them to ride decent because of how short the wheelbase is, how short the springs are, especially on a spring over setup. They just ride like log wagons. So this should ride a little bit better, especially once I go with a slightly longer shackle. That's going to effectively reduce the spring rate a bit, so it will soften it up a little bit. So overall it should ride pretty good and be much better drivability wise overall when it's done. So let's keep going. All right, well, we're making progress. I've got the new EMU leaf spring on the driver's side put in place. 1/2" grade 8 hardware throughout. Got the new bushings put in. As you can see, energy suspension, poly bushings, new U-bolts, and I was able to reuse the spring plate and all that, but everything's just loosely put in, so it'll somewhat hold the axle housing in place while I work on the other side, because with both springs unhooked, the housing likes to twist around and move quite a bit. This will just help keep it from falling while I'm working on it. But anyways, now let's go over here and take a look. We have the same story over here. Cobbled together spring perches and plates and all that. As you might not be able to see, but this weld's broke off the housing already. This weld's not far behind it. So there's not much holding this perch on to begin with. So I gotta come in here, cut this plate off, the factory spring perch, clean everything up, and we'll be ready to get this spring put on. Well, we've got the front end back on the ground. I do not have the shock mounts and everything hooked up yet. And once everything is completed and torqued down and everything, I'll be trimming the U-bolts off and all that fun stuff. But the new leaf springs are in, and much more solid than the previous setup was. But as a matter of fact, the top spring perch on the passenger side that had been added in, there was about a 1/4 inch of weld holding that to the axle housing. So pretty much the only thing holding the front end in place was the U-bolts. How it didn't snap that weld and flip the axle housing or spin the axle housing, I don't know. But everything is cut out and cleaned up. We're back to the spring under setup. Not sure if you can see, my light's going dead. But yeah, everything's good. All the new hardware is 1/2" grade 8. But yeah, so we're good to go as far as the front springs are concerned. And I'll be able to put the shocks back in the factory location. I will need to find some sway bar end links once we get the lift height right. But currently, the rear of this is sitting from the ground to the wheel arch approximately, looks like about 34-ish, maybe a little under 34. Whereas the front, keep in mind it's going to be a good bit lower. The front is now sitting at about 32 1/4. So we're about 1 3/4 low in the front, and that's with, you know, no shocks or anything hooked up, and with it sloped forward. So it could be closer to like 1.5 inches different, which I expected. So We'll probably pick up a set of 1.5-inch lift shackles for it, front and rear. And that should get us back up to spring over lift height, but give us the stability and drivability of a spring under standard lift with these ARB Old Man Emu springs, which are a lot softer and a lot more comfortable ride than this setup was. It should be a lot more stable on the road and overall give a better driving feel, because this will be ran back and forth to work as far as the what the owners plan on doing with it. Occasional, trip out in the field hunting, so on and so forth. Nothing crazy. He's not going to be wheeling it or anything like that, so we're not looking for maximum articulation or things of that nature. We're just looking for good drivability and enough lift to clear the 31-inch tires he's already got. So I think this will be the best of both worlds. It'll give him the lift he's after, but it'll also give him the ride quality and drivability he's after as well. But anyways, let's see here. With all that said, I'm gonna call this video here as far as the front end's going. It's getting kind of long. I don't want it to drag on too much. We will tear into the back end tomorrow. We're gonna be doing the same thing. It should be a little simpler, but yeah, gonna be doing the same stuff. Cut the junk out and put the new springs in, get it all buttoned up, and then we can go from there and figure out what we need to do. Gonna go on and order the lift shackles like I said, and we'll button up brakes here soon as well. Once all that's done, I want to make sure the brake lines and everything are going to be good. We need to order steering components. I want to go on and replace all of that with factory components, other than I got a drop pitman arm for it, so that'll help keep the steering geometry right, instead of that cobbled together bent drag link it's got on it now. Yeah, let's see here. What else we got going on? Oh, and I'm going to have to pull the front end back apart because I've discovered the passenger side kingpin bearings or kingpins are fried. So I went on and ordered a full kingpin set for the front. So we'll rebuild both kingpins on the front of this thing here soon. But anyways, like I said, that's going to wrap it up for this one. If you want to support the channel, there's a PayPal account set up. The link to that is in the description of the video. We've got SuperThanks enabled as well, so you can use that if you want. Feel free to. If you have any comments, questions, complaints, drop them in the comments section below. If you would, hit that like button. It helps us out with the YouTube algorithms, helps get the view counts up, and helps the channel out. With that said, please subscribe. We appreciate you watching.